Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. Today, my guest is Laura Lindekugel. Laura is a licensed therapist in private practice in Edina, Minnesota. She specializes in the gentle renegotiation of trauma and post-traumatic stress and in working with people with sensory processing sensitivity, highly sensitive persons. She has extensive training and is a clinical fellow of the AAMFT approved supervisor and Minnesota board approved supervisor. She has served as a resource for Parents Magazine on the highly sensitive person. Laura is passionate about how we create and sustain healing and change. Welcome, Laura, to the show.
Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah. So I always like to start out. My first question is always, what is your story? Why does brain health and or mental health interest you?
Yeah. So in my early 40s, I tripped backwards one day and developed severe PTSD. I had a full flashback, and it was kind of a shocking and unexpected experience. But that fall mimicked loss of control of my body that had happened during, something traumatic when I was much younger. And it turned out to be a real gift in so many ways because I was referred to a trauma specialist, and it was so amazing to heal from that I went to grad school and did lots of training and now work to help people heal from the same.
Wow. See, I love hearing the why behind people's stories because it just makes so much more of an impact. It makes a whole lot more sense with what you're doing and why you're doing it. So thanks for sharing that. So in your profession, then, what do you see? How does our past trauma affect us as adults? I mean, you kind of had that aha moment where you were forced to face those issues as a child. Do you see that a lot? Is that kind of how it does, or are there other ways?
I think it's quite unusual to develop PTSD suddenly from a body motion. But when I'm working with people, I'm not just thinking about diagnostic criteria for a disorder like PTSD. I'm thinking about all of the ways of kind of human experiencing, really, because I think most of the time they're all impacted in some way. If you think about the nervous system and how your regulation is impacted, how your emotions are impacted, whether you have patterns of automatic shutdown or you go 0 to 100. Some people lose body sensation,
Sure.
Coping patterns, beliefs, I'm worthless, it was my fault, impacts, relationships, it really impacts everything. So when I'm working with somebody, we're looking at what they'd like to heal or change, and I'm also observing things like looks like that nervous system is is struggling, and how can we bring healing to all of the ways of life that they would like to heal.
So. Yeah, great. Does in your experience then too, does the magnitude of the trauma that the person underwent, does that have anything to do with the magnitude of the response in their nervous system?
It really doesn't, which is strange, isn't it? I mean, I think part of it has to do with sensory processing sensitivity. About 15 to 20% of the population has that brain trait. It's not a disorder, it's a trait. And people with that sensitivity are more deeply and profoundly impacted by trauma. They also respond more quickly and positively to treatment, which is also kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I think it also has to do with things like, what kind of nervous system regulation did you develop as an infant and young child? Or have there been events that hijack that regulation along the way? What was your attachment in childhood? Do you have secure attachment? Do you have lots of support and resources? Or have things just been more challenging? when those things are present, trauma has a bigger impact.
I'm sure. Yeah. Can you describe that sensory processing a little bit more for people who might
Yeah.
not be familiar with it?
Yeah, it's characterized by um, taking in more sensory information, processing it more deeply, attuning to detail, higher empathy, and it leads to overstimulation, which can lead to anxiety and depression and just overwhelm.
I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you for that. I think it's probably something we see more commonly than we think that we do. It almost sounds a little bit like ADHD.
Well, that's an interesting comparison. My theory, this is not research based, but
Sure.
my theory is that the part of the thalamus in the brain that's responsible for taking in information and relaying it across the brain just does not filter the
Sure.
way 80 to 85% of brains filter. I remember when our kids were young and we we took them to Disney. They wanted to see the videotape. This is ancient history now. They wanted to see the videotape when we got home, and we popped it in. And my husband said, "Oh, that's so much." And I said, "That's not the way you experienced it when we were there." He said, "What
Yeah.
do you mean?" And we realized I hear and see all of that without filtering out, and my brain isn't focusing on a particular thing. It's just taking in all of that information all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what it feels like. You just need different quiet and self-care, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. Very good. Um, and do you have any thoughts on why some people have more difficulties with that trauma than others, and some just seem to thrive despite what they've been through?
Yeah, I think it comes back to all of those factors, how healthy is your nervous system? I mean, to say a bit more about that. So, our nervous system is designed to function in a kind of dynamic, fluid, responsive way. And when it's functioning optimally, that's what you experience. So, for example, with your cardiovascular system, if you run up a flight of stairs, you would expect your heart rate and your respiration to increase. And then when you stop running, they would slow down.
Mhm.
And when your nervous system is hijacked, you don't get that kind of, sympathetic charge that's proportionate to the challenge or the task. And you don't get that soft braking system that kind of brings you back to center.
Mhm.
And so this can look like lots of different patterns for people, but some people never develop that nervous system baseline regulation, and there are lots of ways it can get hijacked. Trauma is one.
Mhm.
Chronic stress. There
Mhm.
are lots of things we can do. But when we work to restore that, it's powerful. But
Yeah.
yeah, attachment, resources, support, brain function, all those things contribute to how our organism, if you will,
Mhm.
responds to trauma. I mean, we're designed for survival. So all of these things that kick in that are frankly miserable are really our body trying to protect us and help us survive.
Mhm. Kind of like an autoimmune disorder where your body just kind of goes, wreaks havoc on everything. Your
Yes.
brain is doing the same kind of thing.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How often do you get to see the aha moments when people break through
Oh gosh. I don't think I could do this work every day if I didn't
that?
frequently. Um, yeah, I mean, every week, really. I mean, the trauma therapy is really, it's still a bit of a mystery to me in some ways, but it's so amazing to sit with people. Well, I'm not just sitting there,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. To be with people while that is unfolding. So
Mhm.
it's
To
exciting.
be present, to help them, to be that resource.
Yes, and to facilitate that healing process.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I bet that's pretty rewarding.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
when I physically can help people in the hospital, that's probably as close as I'm going to get to that.
Oh,
So
it's
yeah.
the same, Mandy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really exciting when you're actually able to help somebody break through something. By no means do I have the same experience that you do. I always say that I'm on the fence between mental health and neurological stuff, and I try to stay on the physical brain side of things, but it always overlaps a little bit. So I deal with mood a lot, and trauma comes up a lot when I'm talking to patients, and they always have these things that they have not discussed, or they haven't really closed those doors or even open them to try to break through the information to begin with, and that leads to so much stress on their body over time.
Well, yeah, and chronic migraines are correlated with trauma because if you can
Yeah.
imagine the automatic bracing patterns that the body begins after a traumatic event, I mean, when your body is bracing, bracing, bracing for years,
Yeah.
there are lots of different impacts.
Yeah. Yep. I've had lots of conversations with people encouraging them to find a good therapist because they need to work through some issues that they just haven't. And yeah, I see that a lot with neurological issues. So after day of dealing with patients that have all these traumatic issues, how do you then help your brain to kind of resettle?
Um, well, I see a small number of people because I'm exposed to lots of violence and content. I really focus on my sleep and getting really good sleep hygiene. I have a master's in nutrition too, so I I think about nutritional stress and
Yeah.
processed food and do a lot of just simple cooking stuff. Um, yeah. Oh, I exercise for my brain too. Not for any other reason, actually. That's the only reason. No, and I think separating it like that is so great because there's not all of the socialized stuff, it's just a gift I'm giving back to my brain.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, actually. It's one of those things that I'm always talking to people that it's easy or simple, but it's not easy to do to get into those routines and to really kind of tie it to something that helps you. It's a great reason to do something like that.
Yeah.
Very good. What are like 1 to 2 tips that you would share with our listeners that if they are feeling like they need some help or they can maybe identify that they've been through some trauma, what are some things that they can do on their own even before they get to a therapist?
Mm, well, I was going to talk about seeking therapy, but
That's going to be the next step. Yes.
um, I think giving yourself permission for the self-care you need is important. I know self-care has sort of become a buzzword that's not entirely positive, but I think a lot of people that I work with really struggle to actually give themselves permission in their lives day to day to do the things they need, to take 20 minutes for exercise or to negotiate with the person that you sleep next to about the snoring or the temperature of the room or the new mattress or the things that would really have an impact on your health, especially people with sensory processing sensitivity, and especially if those people have a child or children, to take the time they need in quiet silence, darkness, to have a transition from work to home and to make that happen. Those things all make a difference. They really make a difference.
Mhm, mhm.
And then the next part is the
Now, the
therapy
next
part.
part. Yes, yes. So tell us more about that part. How much benefit can people get from therapy beyond what they can do for themselves?
Oh, I don't even know how you could compare really, because I think, I understand. Um, I, after my initial experience of violence, um, I went to talk therapy and kind of felt like, okay, I'm good. I talked through it. I processed it. I'm high functioning. I'm fine. I think looking back that it helped me pack it up and carry it for a lifetime. And I didn't really see all of the ways it was impacting me.
Mhm.
I remember in grad school, we read something by Janina Fisher, who's a renowned trauma expert. And she said, she believes you really need three modalities to really work with trauma. And I took that to heart in grad school, and I see that. I understand why people don't want to go to trauma therapy. Why would you want to go back and look at the thing that is the most terrifying, or even frankly sit in a chair across from someone who is a total stranger and begin that process? It's very stressful and intimidating. But I think what's sweet about beginning therapy and is that, I mean, you build a real relationship. And I mean, I truly deeply care about the people I work with and come to adore them, over time. And you're not doing it alone. You're walking through step by step in this very gentle, piece by piece. I mean, I'm tracking your nervous system, I'm tracking your body and your response so that you feel safe during the process. You feel pretty calm. Most people say, oh, this was so much easier than I expected, or I'm so much calmer than I expected, or things like that. The real gift of doing the work is that there is true peace and freedom on the other side of this work, or there can be. And I mean, I think that's worth the price of admission.
So. Do you ever get a sense for somebody that it would be best not to dig up the past?
Sometimes we really have to do work to kind of establish safety first.
Sure.
People have to be regulated enough to revisit memories without being overwhelmed in different ways. Or I don't want somebody unable to work or something like that. So I do think it's important to work with a licensed therapist. Licensure is there to protect the public so that, if something goes awry, there's I mean, it's just good to have a body that requires you to be right?
A bit of a safety net.
Yeah. And my mind just went blank. What did you ask me?
I think you answered it. We're good.
Okay.
I was trying to think of my next question too. I think we're along that same train of thought. We're thinking so deeply about the information that it's just train of thought. So my next question then. So when somebody's trying to find a therapist in this day and age, now we're a lot on the computer. Do you see any difference between building that relationship with the client when you're on the computer versus in person?
I do. And sometimes it's harder and sometimes it's easier. I think that for some people, being in the privacy of their home, or even, being in a really comfortable setting where they're set up with, blankets and pillows on their sofa, and even for people for whom vulnerability is more difficult, sometimes that screen distance makes things easier.
Sure.
On my end, I was very concerned about virtual because, I'm reading and feeling somebody else's nervous system minute to minute, and I wondered how that would be, but it's been surprisingly successful, just seeing, this much of somebody, there's a lot of information there. So it's been good.
Yeah. You can't see people fidgeting their hands though.
You actually, you can see you can see more than you think. If you got used to really micro tracking these things, you can see a lot.
I'm so used to when I go into a room to see a neurological patient, I have to see their entire body. I don't know how I would do it on a computer, but it's something you learn to deal with, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have to say for people when they say it's hard to find a therapist? Is it okay to go to one appointment and realize that you can't jive, or should you give it more?
Oh boy, I think fit is so important, and I think it is hard to find a good therapist. I think that's true. I mean, I think there are lots of good therapists out there, but I think, it's intimidating the last time I found a therapist, I think I went to 4 different people before I found a fit. And, I want someone, I mean, that's the reason I do consult, is that I want somebody to find a fit. I'm not going to be a fit for everybody. No one is.
Right.
But you want to find somebody that you really feel comfortable with pretty quickly.
Yeah.
really puts you at ease. Um, and I think, my bias based on the Janina Fisher advice is that, um, different trauma modalities have different strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And so having training in multiple areas is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's what I would look for.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Uh, Shifting gears a little bit, what do you see or what would you like to see as the future of brain health and mental health?
We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. I wish people understood that their symptoms are not who they are or their fault, and that they can be resolved, you know. Um, that would be so great. You know,
Yeah,
if people and people who live with them really understood how these things show up. Because sometimes, in a relationship, I'll have a couple come in and they'll say, "Oh, she just shuts down and goes blank." Well, something's happening, It's not just that she suddenly hates you or is uncooperative.
There's a wall being put up.
Well, and if you look at PET scans of the brain, people who have experienced trauma, anytime you're in survival physiology, well, I could go on and on about how the brain is functioning and when in post-traumatic stress, but really, when you are in survival physiology, a lot of your brain function is going offline temporarily, and only the parts that you need for survival are still lit up, so to speak. And it takes time for that brain to come back online. So,
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible to continue growing even after therapy sessions stop?
I do. Yeah, I do, because I think some of that work is just integration over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, somebody who's been highly traumatized and has lost nearly all or all body sensation, we can get body sensation back, but you could spend quite a long time still integrating welcoming body sensation, attuning to body sensation, noticing what it means about your needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can attest to that. I had a really, really good therapist that I talk to people about all the time. And I, being so close to mental health with neurology, I talk to my coworkers, my colleagues, my patients, and explain to them the benefits that I got out of it and that it continues for me afterwards because I've still been able to say, oh, well, that was one of the things that we talked about. And now I can see how that's actually benefiting me. So I can tell you too that it doesn't just stop after the last session, but I do try to break down that stigma as much as I can, and hence having shows like this bringing that knowledge about and just sharing it with people to say that it's okay and it's a normal thing. My last episode that we recorded, the interviewee said it's okay to not be okay, and that's absolutely true. And that's the first step in identifying that you need to get the help. And like we've just talked about, there are so many good people out there. Just finding the right fit for you is definitely key, and just doing it.
Well, and remembering that you don't have to dive into anything you don't want to. In fact, there are a number of trauma therapy modalities where I've worked with people who don't want to tell me what happened. They don't want to say out loud, and they don't need to ever say out loud what happened, because there are other ways of working with it and setting up reprocessing so that, I'm tracking and making sure that they're regulated enough and safe and within that window of tolerance, but their reprocessing is their own. And I think too that, you could just meet a therapist and develop a relationship first if you have the time and the resources for that. You don't have to go session one and say, this is what I'm dealing with.
Yeah. Open it all up. Verbal vomit, as I call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I think we could probably talk all day long on this.
Yes.
Any other things that you want to share that I haven't asked a question about that you wanted to add in today?
I think you asked a lot of good questions.
Perfect.
I just hope people will realize, I mean, there is just a peace and freedom I couldn't begin to describe on the other side. That's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So worth investing the time in your own healing.
Absolutely. Priceless, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Oh, my website. I'm sure you'll put a little
I will. Yeah.
on the podcast. Yeah, the website is always the best way to reach me.
Are you taking new patients right now?
No. But if somebody fills out a contact form, I always respond with referrals of people I know who have similar training usually.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah.
Great conversation. Yeah.
Thank you for all your work to support people and for doing the podcast to help share more information with people.
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm loving every episode. So thanks for being on.
Yeah, of course.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.